I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, President Biden signing a flurry of executive orders, a number in an effort to curb the spread of the coronavirus and deliver economic assistance to Americans in need. Others aim to roll back President Trump's actions on the environment and immigration. Fox News correspondent Gillian Turner breaks down these measures, the Biden team's immigration reform bill, and discusses if there is an appetite in Congress to pass it. President Biden once again urging the nation to come together in his inaugural address. Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace weighs in on the commander-in-chief's agenda for his first 100 days in office and whether his calls for unity will have an impact. Plus commentary from former White House speechwriter and Fox News contributor Mark Thiessen. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Greg Jarrett.
I'm Shannon Bream.
I'm Steve Ducey, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Friday, January 22nd, 2021. I'm Lisa Brady. An early focus on immigration for President Biden. But is Congress ready to try again?
Republicans today are saying there's less appetite for immigration reform writ large in Congress today than there was back in 2013 when there was another dramatic legislative overhaul. Democrats are saying they now have the majority so they can move full steam ahead.
I'm Chris Foster. It's a new, almost certainly quieter era of American politics.
There's no question Biden is going to be a more, and I say this in a certain way, boring president. He's not going to be in your face every day. I think that's one of the things people voted for.
We speak with Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace.
And I'm Mark Thiessen. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
The pandemic is priority one for the new president.
We'll move heaven and earth to get more people vaccinated for free and create more places for them to get vaccinated.
On Thursday, signing executive orders designed to speed more COVID-related supplies, including vaccines and more testing, and to help schools and businesses reopen. But President Biden has also been moving quickly to reverse some of President Trump's decisions, and much of that is focused on immigration.
The acting Homeland Security Secretary issued a memorandum to review and reset immigration enforcement priorities.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki announcing a pause on deportations, while a mixture of executive actions and proposed legislation targets everything from the border wall and the travel ban to asylum policies. The plan would also allow an 8-year path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants already here and a shorter path for the so-called dreamers brought here illegally as children.
I was disappointed to see within hours of assuming office, the new administration was more interested in helping illegal immigrants than helping our own citizens.
House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy argues now is not the time for more lenient immigration rules when millions of Americans are out of work from the pandemic. But are these mainly symbolic moves so far, or will they have an impact?
I would wager that all of them are going to have a real and immediate impact on the people who they target.
Fox News correspondent Gillian Turner.
Some of the executive orders he passed did things like he's now stopped construction of the southern border wall. That has a direct impact on people's lives, on major contracts that the U.S. federal government has. He's reversed the so-called Muslim travel ban, which means that people from those countries can again travel to the United States. That has a direct impact on those people's lives. And then now he's also making moves to protect the children of undocumented immigrants, the so-called dreamers that are covered under DACA. So I'd say all of these things really directly impact people's lives. The White House themselves are billing all of these changes as a, quote, return to normalcy and a, quote, to decency, and they're centering these things from a PR perspective around American families. They're saying this is about healing and providing normalcy for Americans' families that have been separated from one another because of these policies.
Do we know, though, how effective some of these policies that are now reversed had been in addressing the immigration problem?
The answer to that question depends on who you ask. So if you ask Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill, if you ask Republicans who supported President Trump, they'll tell you all these policies he enacted were incredibly effective. They'll tell you the Muslim ban travel policy kept people out of the United States who came from countries who weren't complying with guidelines set by the U.S. federal government about information sharing. They weren't sharing information about suspected terrorists and other people whose records had things on them the United States was interested in pursuing. They will tell you that building the border wall created sovereignty for the United States that has been lacking sorely for decades and was keeping illegal immigrants from South America out of the country. Now, if you ask Democrats, they'll tell you that none of those objectives were even worth achieving in the first place anyway, because they don't represent American values. America doesn't want to keep people from foreign countries outside of its borders. We want to bring them in and embrace them and help them create better lives. And they'll tell you that they also want to bring those people in because they contribute to the economy. So where you stand on this issue really depends on which side of the aisle you sit on.
Where does the asylum policy stand now? Because asylum seekers had been waiting in Mexico instead of waiting inside the U.S. for cases to be heard under one of the new Trump administration policies. Is that changing too?
Well, Jen Psaki said in her press conference that the Biden administration wanted to restart welcoming refugees and asylum seekers back into the United States. So presumably those people are going to get moving really quickly. He signed these executive orders now, but obviously it's not the kind of policy that you can really enact overnight. You can sign all the paperwork you want, but you have to have people at the border to process people who are coming into the United States. You've got to have people there to do background checks. You've got to have you've got to have the budget in place so that when you bring refugees into the country, you can support them with government services. A lot of that was cut back during the Trump administration. It will take some time to rebuild up to the point where we were at the end of the Obama administration.
Right, able to accept more people arriving at the border, I guess. But the incoming administration had already started sending signals to new caravans of immigrants that formed south of the border before the inauguration, not to come right now, at least not yet. They're on their way anyway, though. Have we been given any indication how they plan to handle that?
Well, the caravans are sort of continuous motion machines. There's always one caravan or another headed towards the United States at any given point in time. So the Biden administration, you're right, did make signals that they wanted the latest coming, I believe, from Guatemala not to come right away. Who knows if they're going to listen or not.
They're also, I know, putting a pause on deportations. What does that mean, practically speaking? Does that mean not removing criminals as well? Is it a full pause?
It does, according to the experts and sources that we've been talking to today. They're putting a pause on certain non-citizens. So that means people who are here without documents or who are here illegally. It's our understanding that this is going to impact thousands of people currently in the country. So those people are now going to be here indefinitely.
And they haven't said what's going to happen after the pause is over in terms of whether they resume a certain amount of deportations or, where it goes from there.
No, they have not specified any of those details yet.
President Biden certainly favors a path to citizenship, something that critics historically have called amnesty, and it's something that's been really a partisan wedge every time it's come up in immigration-related legislation in the past. Is there any indication that at this point in time, immigration reform has a better chance on Capitol Hill, other than the fact that Democrats now have the majority in both chambers and the White House?
Republicans today are saying there's less appetite for immigration reform writ large in Congress today than there was back in 2013 when there was another dramatic legislative overhaul. Democrats are saying they now have the majority so they can move full steam ahead on this issue. This always becomes, as soon as this issue of some kind of a large-scale overhaul is raised, it immediately becomes the big-ticket item What it includes specifically is a pathway to citizenship for 11 million undocumented immigrants who are currently here. And under the new proposed Biden legislation, each of those people would now be on a path where they can attain full-fledged citizenship with all the attendant rights in 8 years. So it's something that Congress is going to have to debate really thoroughly over the coming days. It seems unlikely that a whole lot of Republicans are going to get on board.
I know Republicans usually push for enhanced security measures as part of negotiations on an immigration bill. That's what they've done in the past. Though in the Trump years, enhanced security was usually, kind of language that was used when they were really talking about the border wall. So now that by executive order, the new president has said we're stopping that, or at least stopping the diversion of funds that was helping it to continue. Could there maybe be some bipartisan agreement on other security measures, like, better use of technology instead of the wall at the border?
It could be, or it could be that stopping the construction of the border wall completely is only going to inflame Republicans and create more division. And because of that, they're going to hold out on the Biden administration and refuse to give an inch on immigration at all. I could see it going really either way here.
Fox's Gillian Turner, thank you so much for your time.
You bet. Thanks so much.
This is Mark Thiessen with your Fox News commentary coming up.
We're a couple days into the new Biden administration with executive orders already signed on the coronavirus response, climate change, immigration, diversity, and more. He's asking Congress to support his plan for more coronavirus financial relief. And whatever happens politically, he says, let's start fresh.
Let's begin to listen to one another again, hear one another, see one another, show respect to one another. Politics doesn't have to be a raging fire, destroying everything in its path. Every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war.
That's President Biden during his inaugural address.
Well, I thought he made a very effective speech. I thought it was just right.
Chris Wallace is the host of Fox News Sunday.
In two aspects. One, it obviously comes against the backdrop of the fact that exactly 14 days before there were insurrectionists running wild on that platform, trying to crash the Capitol and keep our duly elected officials from performing their constitutional duties. And two, I really liked the tone of it. It wasn't one of those inaugural addresses for the ages. It was to me, it was Joe Biden talking over the backyard fence to his neighbors saying, we got to stop this. Politics is a blood sport, is killing the country, and we've got to find a way to debate. We're going to disagree, but to debate issues responsibly, ascribing good faith to each other, and try to move the country forward. I thought it was just what we needed.
Yeah, he talked about unity in that speech a little differently than he had during the campaign, when he was sort of pushing this notion that we'll go back to the days when, guys go and work it out over a steak and a cocktail. Now he's using terms like getting enough people on board. He knows he's not ever going to be all things to all people. That this wasn't like the Obama speech where it felt like, okay, I'm elected, now everything's better.
No. And I think he's if not a realist. But, he was saying, I'm going to be the president to all the people and hear me out. Debate within the guardrails of democracy is fine, but disunion isn't. And, and again, it was very much colored by the fact that just 14 days before, there were thousands of people swarming the Capitol looking to take Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pence captive. That's a pretty... it's an unprecedented thing, and I think he needed to speak about it.
Yeah, and that riot was precipitated by a series of lies about election fraud. And the president talked a little bit about that during his speech, saying, look, that needs to stop.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it was a call to all of us. He talked at one point, he said there's truth and there are lies, and there are lies that are spread for power and profit. And I think that's a cautionary message to us in the media, to people on social media, to people in their Twitter accounts. You can have any opinion you want, but let's not be spreading lies about elections being stolen or election, vote count machines that were, set by Venezuela and and the Russians. I mean, it's just, that was so destructive. These last 2 months have been so terrible for the country, and we just need to get back to reality.
Yeah. President Obama is perceived by at least a lot of Democrats, maybe resentful Democrats, at having squandered some of his early time in office. Joe Biden seems to be taking some pretty big swings on his own to the extent that he can without Congress. Do you see any pitfalls for him, any mistakes to avoid, or do you like what he's doing so far?
Well, it's not a matter of like or not. It's a matter of elections have consequences. And, some people, and I think this is silly, are saying, well, he talks about unity and then he signed 17 executive orders. Well, of course he is. He won. These are things he promised in his campaign, and I don't see that as disunion. I mean, nobody is saying that calls for unity mean we're all going to get together and Democrats aren't going to pursue their agenda. That's ridiculous. Just as when Donald Trump came in, I don't think people were shocked that he was actually going to do things that he said he was going to do. That's legitimate. That's why we hold elections. But there's a difference between people pursuing an agenda within the guardrails of democracy, as Biden put it, and basically trying to burn down, in this case, the Capitol. And that's just there's a line there, and I don't understand why people have trouble distinguishing one from the other.
There are some Democrats, maybe on the left, who want really not much to do with unity anyway. They say that ship has sailed. It's time for boots on necks and taking every single inch that we can.
Well, the fact is, Joe Biden beat those folks. There was Bernie Sanders ran, and there was and was supported by AOC, and Elizabeth Warren ran, and Biden ran. He's a liberal. He's certainly left of center, but he ran as a much more moderate, much more centrist liberal Democrat, and he beat him. And, I think it's been clear from the people he's put in his cabinet and the policies he's pursuing, he's not. He campaigned against Medicare for all. He campaigned against the Green New Deal. Yes, he wants to see health care reform, and yes, he wants to see climate change legislation, but he isn't for those extreme positions. And first of all, they're not going to happen. You got a 50-50 Senate. You got a margin of about 4 or 5 votes for the Democrats in the House. That went out the window with the very narrow results in the election. But in addition, it isn't what he believes in.
The Democrats do technically control the Senate now. How does Chuck Schumer operate differently now as majority leader? How does Mitch McConnell operate differently now as minority leader? He's been in that position before. Chuck Schumer has not.
Right. Well, he controls what gets on the floor. There's nothing more important than that. What gets up for a debate and a vote on the Senate floor and what doesn't. That was the tremendous power that McConnell had to set the agenda for the Senate, and now it'll be Chuck Schumer's. But having said that, and particularly these last 2 years, McConnell didn't have, 53-47. He didn't have much of a majority, and now Schumer has a 1 vote. It's going to be, assuming that it's party line on some issues, there's going to be 1 vote. Kamala Harris, the presiding officer, the vice president, to break a tie. What I hope, and maybe this is just, foolish idealism on my part, is that it isn't party line votes. There is a small centrist lobby in the Senate, and you can include people sort of more conservative Democrats like Joe Manchin and John Tester and Kyrsten Sinema, and more moderate Republicans like Mitt Romney and Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. And boy, how great would it be if you could get this bipartisan group in the center that kind of steered us and that we were able to get things accomplished. It's going to be awfully hard to get 60 votes, to get 10 Republicans on top of the 50 Democrats so that you can break a filibuster. But it seems to me on a lot of important legislation, or certainly on financial stuff that you can do through reconciliation, that, you could get 53, 54 votes for stuff if it's moderate enough, if it's centrist enough. And that's what the founders wanted. That's why they created the Senate the way they did, so that, you got to get some bipartisan buy-in. You can't just ram it through on a straight party line vote.
We're getting back to what used to be standard for at least a few years there, these daily press briefings in the White House. Somebody asks a question, the president's spokesperson answered it, maybe there's some obfuscation, but probably not an outright lie, and then everybody just goes on with their day. But when those went away under President Trump, it was kind of weird at first, but then everybody got by. Do you think they're still useful with the communication methods we have now? Or are you happy to see Jen Psaki up there every day?
Yes. Look, let's not fool ourselves, and she works for the president. She said, well, he works for the American people, and I work for him, so I work for the American people. Yes, but she works for the president. She's the president's spokesperson. She's going to put the president's spin on issues. But, she's a good, serious, responsible person. There are, I was in the White House press room for 6 years covering Ronald Reagan and dealing with the press secretary. There's a lot of useful information that comes out of those if it's an administration that wants to put useful information out. I thought by the end with Kayleigh McEnany, they became absolutely useless because it really was a campaign platform and had nothing to do with trying to inform the American people what its government is doing. Now, it went both ways. I thought it became far too aggressive and confrontational on the part of the White House press secretaries. I thought it became far too confrontational on the part of the White House press corps. But, if we could go back to business as usual briefings where reporters ask serious questions and get serious answers, and look, it's not going to be as nice as it was yesterday. Every administration gets into trouble. They get into controversies. People screw up. White House press corps is going to jump on that like sharks with blood in the water. And that's all part of the process, too. But if it remains basically civil and information and fact-based, I think it's a very useful thing.
Well, Chris, 2 weeks ago we were talking about a riot at the Capitol. Last week we were talking about impeachment. Now we've got a new president. I'm relieved that maybe we're going to have a little bit less to talk about next week.
Well, look, one of the things about the news business, it's why you got into it, it's why I got into it, is truth is always stranger than fiction. You can't imagine what we've been through. You could never write it, what we were through the last 4 years. There's no question Biden is going to be a more, and I say this in a certain way, boring president. He's not going to be in your face every day. I think that's one of the things people voted for. But, there are a lot of big issues. We got COVID. We've got terrible economic problems. You've got this, the future of the Republican Party. Is it going to be Trump Republicans or traditional Republicans? There's going to be plenty to talk about.
All right, good. We'll do it. Chris Wallace, host of Fox News Sunday. Thanks, man.
You bet. Thank you, Chris.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network. In these ever-changing times, you can rely on Fox News for hourly updates for the very latest news and information on your time. Listen and download now at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Rate and review the Fox News Rundown on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
And now, some good news with Tanya J. Powers.
This week, the world met Amanda Gorman. In the space of 5 minutes, using 723 words, Amanda's poem, The Hill We Climb, became one of the most talked about aspects of the inauguration of President Joe Biden.
Mr. President, Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President, Mr. Emhoff, Americans, and the world.
And at 22, she's become the youngest inaugural poet ever in the U.S.
When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the
Gorman,
beast.
who studied sociology at Harvard, at times brought her personal story to the forefront.
Finished, we, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one.
There was more than one nod to the musical Hamilton, including references to the song History Has Its Eyes on You, sung by George Washington in the play.
Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie.
She says she listened to the Broadway cast recording while working on the piece, which she finished writing in the hours following the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol, the very place she stood to recite her words on Wednesday.
We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated.
In 2017, Amanda became the first National Youth Poet Laureate at just 19 years old, an age at which she declared she would run for president in 2036. The inaugural introduction may have been the first major event for her this year, but it's not the last. In September, her debut poetry collection will be released, as well as a picture book for young readers. More steps toward the bright future that lies ahead for Amanda Gorman.
Sun-baked South, we will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade of flame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
Tanya J. Powers, Fox News.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Mark Thiessen.
What's on your mind?
In his inaugural address, President Biden extended an olive branch to supporters of former President Donald Trump. Let's start afresh, all of us, he said. Let's begin to listen to one another again, hear one another, see one another, show respect to one another. Politics doesn't have to be a raging fire destroying everything in its path, unquote. He asked Trump supporters, quote, to hear me out as we move forward, to take a measure of me in my heart. If you still disagree, so be it. That's democracy, he said. But he added, the time had come to, quote, end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. And he promised that, quote, my whole soul is in this, bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation, unquote. For a nation wounded by rancor, division, and insurrection, those words were a balm. But, as Biden also noted in his address, delivering on those promises, quote, requires so much more than words, end quote. What he does in his first days in office will determine whether his words will have real meaning. If Biden really wants to restore unity, there are 3 specific steps he could take. First, he needs to find a major initiative to work with on Republicans early in his presidency. When President Bill Clinton took office, one of the first things he did was push for passage of the North American Free Trade Agreement, negotiated by his Republican predecessor and opposed by many in his own party. When President George W. Bush took office, one of the first things he did was reach out to the most liberal member of the United States Senate, Ted Kennedy, and offer to work with him to pass what became the No Child Left Behind Act. Biden needs his own equivalent of No Child Left Behind, a major initiative that can bring conservatives and liberals together and help legislators on both sides of the aisle begin flexing their bipartisan muscles again. Second, unity requires compromise, and the mechanism that ensures compromise and bipartisanship is the filibuster, which allows the Senate minority to delay or block legislation. Biden is the first president since Lyndon Johnson who is truly a man of the Senate, so he understands you can't restore unity while trampling the rights of the minority at the same time. If he wants to restore unity, he and fellow Democrats will have to moderate their demands, agree to some Republican priorities, and sometimes accept no for an answer. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is pressing Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to preserve the legislative filibuster as part of their agreement governing the rules of a 50-50 Senate. Biden should tell Schumer he supports such an agreement. Finally, Biden can't restore unity if the Democratic Senate spends the next 6 to 8 weeks presiding over the impeachment trial of his predecessor. Trump's incitement of the January 6 Capitol riots was an impeachable offense. Were he still in office, his removal might be warranted. But Trump has left the White House. Does Biden really want Washington focused on his predecessor's failings instead of his own priorities during the first critical weeks of his presidency? A trial would be divisive and distracting. Biden should urge Schumer and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to put aside the articles of impeachment so Congress can start working to enact his agenda. In his address, Biden said, quote, this is our historic moment of crisis and challenge, and unity is the path forward, unquote. By taking these steps, he can rise to the moment and give that promised meeting. I'm Mark Thiessen.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. Did you hear the news? Now you can. With instant updates from Fox News for Amazon Alexa. Just say,
Alexa, play news from Fox.
In Fox News.
It's the latest when you need it, on demand, from Fox News and Amazon Alexa.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.